I'm a longtime WIMDI fan. I think I was at the very first one well, certainly the first careers one you've done, and I've done them every year since. I don't think I've missed one. So this is just a quick overview of where we're going tonight. These are the things I want to cover with you tonight. Like Holly and Tiffany have been sharing, there are some key mindsets that can help you reframe how you're looking at negotiation. And I think this is one of the number one things, Holly just talked about it too, is sometimes the way we are reacting to negotiation is because how we've even thought about it. I'm going to share with you my blueprint. And one of the things I love about having put this blueprint together about negotiation is you can take it anywhere for anything, anytime. And it doesn't even matter if you think about it as a negotiation. It applies to any types of conversation. I'm going to share a bunch of what I call my success secrets, especially when it comes to this type of negotiation when talking about money, because that makes us all kind of squirm when we're talking about salary or compensation, because many times we are, and when we're in performance reviews and moving into the salary negotiation or the raises, we end up getting into that little squirrely place. And then I'm going to also share with you some next steps that for those who want to take it further after tonight. So I also want to ask you, how many of you feel like this when you think about negotiation? And I'd love to, if you can, if you're on camera, you can go ahead and raise your hand if this is you, or share in chat, say me. Do you feel this way about negotiation? Does it make you feel a little knotted up, a little anxious? Who can relate? I see some hands. Thank you for showing me your physical hands. Yep, some yeps and me's showing up in the chat. Yeah, so, Tiffany was talking about the whole prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and getting all squirrely, right? So when it comes to thinking about negotiation, many of us, especially women, we can get anxious when it comes to negotiation. In fact, 32% of women report feeling anxiety about negotiation. And more than that, women are 2.5 times more likely to feel a great deal of apprehension when it comes to negotiation. And now, when Tiffany was talking about the brain, she was talking about the primitive brain, and this is what anxiety does. It triggers that primitive part of our brain that takes the energy away from our prefrontal cortex, our executive brain that helps us make decisions. Because this is why it's so important to understand this when it comes to negotiation, because it makes it more likely that we will take poor advice or make a bad decision when we're stuck in that place of anxiety and we're coming from the back of our brain. So why is this important? Well, we've talked to both Tiffany and Holly were talking about how you want to be able to share data in your performance review and in your negotiation. So I'm sharing some data with you tonight because this is the foundation for why it's so effing important for women to move through the veil of anxiety, to move beyond it to the next place so that you can ask for what it is you want. And Holly put out a great framework for helping you identify what it is that you want in a very clear way. So here's more about why it's so important. Now, who's heard of the gender pay gap? Anybody here? You should see all hands raised, right? The gender pay gap. Well, we also know within the gender pay gap, so we know there is a gender pay gap. There's also a racialized gender pay gap as well that makes it harder, even more harder for women of color, people of color in general, and women of color compared to white women. And this part here is interesting too, is that women are statistically, on average, 4 times less likely to negotiate, especially when it comes to salary, job performance, promotions. And here's the other part. When we do ask for more, and I want you to be thinking about this, we tend to ask for 30% less than men do on average. Our expectations are lower. Holly said, be sure to be looking to ask for what's possible, not what you think you can get. That's where we tend to settle for what we think is reasonable or what we think is barely possible. So we talked about some of the implications. So what are the implications for not asking? What does that cost? Well, the lifetime cost of not asking when it comes to salary reviews and promotions or job negotiations for a new job is it can cost over $1.5 million over the course of your career, especially when you've been moving up the ladder. And here's the thing, you might assume, well, all I need to do is just get up the ladder. The farther I get up the ladder, surely it's going to get better. Guess what? It only gets worse because the gap widens the further up you go. So CEOs in Canada, this is about from 2 years ago, on average are being paid almost $1 million less, female CEOs, than male CEOs in Canada. $1 million, not over a lifetime, in a year. Now we know from the math, obviously they're making good money. We might consider that to be a great salary. However, the gap is still wider there. And again, I mentioned this earlier, that for racialized women, there's an even greater 20% greater pay gap. And so other places where we aren't negotiating, or where women negotiate less, or are asking for less, or perhaps are being offered less, is in terms of applying for fewer senior positions. So women are applying at a lower rate than men for those senior positions, perhaps because, again, if you're thinking, well, I don't think I can get that. I don't think that I have enough qualifications. So we tend to minimize what we have, what we're bringing to the table. And there's lots of stats around this area as well. Now, this was an interesting stat from last year, that the average performance review raises in 2020 was 3%. I don't have a number for this year, but that's what the average performance review raise. And we talked about that question. Holly, you asked, how much do you think this case study person that you had mentioned could get? And we said maybe 2 or 3% based on what she had said. And think about that tweak. You make that little tweak, what you can do that can up your number from 3% in 2021 to 5%, to 7%, to 10%. What if you could get an extra 5% on your performance review this year? What would that be worth to you this year? And then compound it again into future years. Right. So let's look at this. So what happens? Let's up the ante, and let's go get an MBA. Surely that will help us do better. Surely that's going to be the key. And this is an area where many women will go. We think, well, we don't have enough right now. We're being told all these messages that Holly talked about earlier, and Tiffany, in terms of getting feedback. So surely I'll do better if I get an MBA. Well, statistically, we still see a gap, and the gap starts right from the day the MBA is awarded. It starts even there. There's a tiny gap, 3%, seems really small, but then over the years, that gap widens again. And then it's compounded by the fact that women's peak earning years are earlier in life than men's peak earning years. So women's peak earning years tend to peak around the age of 40, and for men around the age of 49. And so we see this drop off starting to happen. I don't have the exact reasons for why that drop off happens, except that this gap, once it's there, it starts to widen. And so what tends to happening as well is it widens even more, because if we have accepted less at some point along the line, well, think about it from human resources point of view, or think about it from your hiring manager's point of view, or your boss or your leader. If you're presented with 2 candidates for a position, and they come sort of roughly in the same area, but one is paid more than the other, which one will your biases say is more competent for the promotion, for that higher position? I like to know, would it be the one that's paid more, or the one that's paid less? Do you see a difference between those 2 areas? Right, Eva says more, the one that's paid more. Yes, it's an automatic bias that the person who's already earning more must be more competent until you show otherwise. So this is why it's so important that you want to be negotiating, you want to be asking for as much as you can, as early as you can. And it's also never too late. It's also never too late. Because we can move farther when we are asking for those things that we want. And I want to be clear, this isn't just about salary. This isn't just about compensation, but salary and compensation are very key metrics. We've been talking about data and metrics, right? And you've just confirmed it. It's a key metric because of how we perceive it. It's all in the eyes of the beholder in terms of how it's perceived. And so think about the salary and compensation, less about the money, especially if you've got any buggy boos around asking for money because you don't want to be perceived as being greedy, asking for more money. If you have any issues around money that way, see it less as about the money and more about the progression, what it says about your career, where you're going and where you want to go. Holly's already encouraged you to have that 3-year plan. Where do you want to be? That's a key metric. So be thinking about how this can play out for you and use it as fuel to move forward in terms of asking for more. So what happens? Why do we have this? Why do we have these problems? Well, there's an interesting disconnect with women in negotiation. And I've heard this ever since I started talking about negotiation many years ago. It was something like, I'd be talking to senior women leaders in a law firm, practicing lawyers, partners, or top of the region or the country in terms of sales. So extremely good at negotiating for their companies, for their clients, for their businesses. But they'd say this to me, and it's almost universally the same line. But Carrie, I can't negotiate for myself out of a paper bag. How many of you can relate to this disconnect? Being really good at being able to negotiate for others, but not so great for yourself. Right. So this is common. And here's the funny thing. I saw this happening, but research about whatever kind of negotiator, whatever level negotiator men are, they tend to be the same in both circumstances. Whereas for many women, there's this disconnect, great at negotiating for others, kind of rocky or not feeling so good about it when I'm negotiating for myself. And this may seem like an awkward thing because women are supposed to be good at relationships, right? We're supposed to be great at taking turn games and things like that. I would put this down to a lot of the inherent biases that we see in our culture that we've taken on and internalized ourselves, as well as just maybe some general gender differences as well. So if you know this is true for yourself to have this disconnect, then we want to look at ways you can maybe even reframe things so that that disconnect isn't quite so bold and jarring for you, so that you can move forward in your situation. So Elizabeth says we have to keep changing jobs to get the greatest increase. Okay, so that there is some truth in that for many organizations where it becomes, you're the known quantity. And so if you already are perhaps on a lower level, you may feel like you want to leave to come back. And this is true, not necessarily because of gender differences, but because when you're a known quantity and when you're inside an organization, there tends to be some of those limiters. Like somebody said earlier in answer to one of the questions that Holly, I think it was Holly when in your area, what's the budget? Greatest limiter of them all from the employer side. Is to be thinking about what's my limit, what's my budget, and even asking the question, what's your budget, already sets up a limiter. So throw that out. Yeah, you might want to be asking about what range they have come to the table, but also be prepared to show what range you're capable of and what your value is. So sometimes, yes, leading is a good way to then come back at a higher level because you've shown some progression and you've shown that somebody else really, really likes you. Right? It's like dating. When you start dating and you start seeing other people too, sometimes you become more desirable because you're a hot commodity on the market. Same thing is going to happen here. So this disconnect, we want to be able to, sorry, I'm going backwards in the wrong way, but I want to assure you, this is my story. This is me with straighter hair, and I'm just writing my story here. I want to share a little snippet about my story because I want to assure you, this is my story too, right? This is my story too. When I started out as a lawyer, I became a lawyer, and then I was interviewing for my first job, and it didn't occur to me to ask for more, especially when the recruiter said, "Well, here's the offer." This is in the public sector, so it was a known publicized range as well. I didn't even have to ask for the range. So here's what we have to offer you. Was the bottom of the range, by the way. And she said the fateful words, "And that's the best we can do." So what did I do? I said yes, right? I wanted the job. It was an awesome job. And I said yes automatically, not even thinking about it. And then 18 months later, I found out that the male colleague who was hired at the same time as me and 2 other women was paid $8,000 more. Boop, right? Okay, so I didn't know. And my other 2 women colleagues, it was frustrating, Elizabeth, because we looked at each other and said, well, dang, what the hell happened for us? And we realized we heard the same thing. That's the best we can do. But we also found out that so did he. But he didn't just say yes automatically. He said, oh, something along these lines. Oh, well, that's too bad because it won't work for me. What I would need to do this job is X. And he got somewhere between what she offered the first time and what he asked for. And it was a heck of a lot better than what we were offered. Okay. So he just busted through the assumption that you couldn't do anything with that's the best we can do, otherwise known as no, or some other variation of no. Now, what happened in fast forward is we ended up negotiating back our fee, we ended up closing the gap because we went into our boss's office together and we said, this is what happened. And we think this is something that you're going to want to remedy. And to his credit, he did. And so we were able to renegotiate that. Now we had a unique point of leverage that I might share later on. But the point here is that for the three of us, each of us, we were that story of 4 times less likely to ask, right? We were that statistic. And it wasn't until years later that I realized, oh, this wasn't just us. This is actually research that shows that this is what's going on. Now, the killer piece here is that at that job, I was actually acting as a mediator. I was helping parties to negotiate. And when I put 2 and 2 together and realized what I was doing, I realized, okay, I got to figure this negotiation thing out. And so this is what has led me in great part to where I am today. And I am absolutely passionate about women getting these tools and being able to use them. So we didn't ask, and then we did, right? And that was the key to us being able to get that back. And so I just want to, I'm only showing this because I wanted to share, because even though I was there, and even though I am where I am today, it's because I did all those things in between. And so now I talk about negotiation in all these different places. I have a book that's just come out on conversation secrets, because that's at the heart of everything, is being able to have good communication and conversations. And I've been able to work with fantastic clients, like my client, we'll call her Kim here. And now this key thing here, this is, a pretty amazing result. She went from senior manager to a global director, a local senior manager to a global director, doubled her salary, over $100,000 in salary increase in the same company, And since we're talking about promotions here tonight, I wanted to share this with you because this is some of the absolutely amazing results that can happen with somebody who came to me because she hadn't negotiated her entire life. And so when she came to me and we started working together, she said, I'm in this situation. I really want to go for something here. So we actually worked over 3 months, and she was negotiating, she was fielding offers from 2 or 3 different companies as well as internally. And this is what she was able to end up with as a result of all of the preparation, all the clarity work that we did, like Holly was talking about, in terms of getting really clear on what it was she wanted, what that looked like, what that mattered to her. And then working through a negotiation system, which I'm sharing with you tonight. This is what her result was. So I get to do this with my clients. Now, I want to come back to that place. So I was talking earlier about anxiety and how this can really trip us up. So I want to talk about how you're even thinking about what is negotiation. So I want to ask you, and I'd love to see some things in chat. If you can write down just how you define negotiation. Negotiation is a conversation. Daryl, you've heard me talk a number of times. Bargaining, trying to find agreement, tug of war between 2 sides, a compromise. Yeah, so these are a lot of ways in which we talk about negotiation. People talk about it, this tug of war, right? Bargaining. And how does this make you feel when you see words like this? How does this make you feel when you interpret negotiation this way? How many of you want to jump in and say, yes, I can't wait to do it? Okay, Holly, that's not fair. Right. And Shadi, your face is looking uncertain. I don't think you're going to, do you think you're going to jump in right away? No. Yeah. So this is kind of the thing, right? So I want to share with you the way I like to look at negotiation. So I have a few different ways. And this is what Tiffany was talking about reframing, is about the frames that we choose. Think about like a picture frame, right? The frame that we choose to look at negotiation through colors everything. right? The kind of frame that you use, it colors how you look at it and the meaning that you make from it, and then how your body reacts, whether it causes you anxiety. And so here's some definitions I want to share with you tonight. We can get into this place where we think this is going to be like a fight. I'm going to have to knock them out, or I'm going to have to win, or something like that. One of you mentioned win-win as well. And so there's another way of thinking about it. So when I talk about negotiation, I talk about the definitions as, yes, number one, it is a conversation. And so we can think about it as just a conversation. So yeah, it's a difficult conversation. It is, after all, a conversation. It might be something that you're having a conversation internally as well. It's also about navigating a relationship, and particularly in the context that we're talking about tonight, right? Because if you're in performance review cycle, you're looking for a promotion, you are already in a relationship with this company, this organization, with your boss, with the team. You are in you're in a relationship already. So this is about navigating that relationship. If you're going for a new job, it is about navigating that new relationship. So really it happens in the context of a relationship that hopefully, ideally, is going to be a long and fruitful and mutually rewarding relationship. It's a different frame than thinking about going into a difficult conversation or a fight with an enemy. When we want or need someone else's cooperation, that is also a time when we're in a negotiation. We're looking to influence others. We would like their cooperation, or we're hoping to change their minds, help them see things in a different way. And then sometimes more classically, we can think about it as an exchange of value. And when I'm talking about exchange of value, value isn't only about the money, as Holly's been talking about earlier, as well as Tiffany. It's about identifying the value that you're bringing to the table, bringing to the conversation, and the value that you're looking for in return. Whether money is part of that or not is maybe yes, maybe no. Often it is, but it's not the only thing that is being exchanged of value. Now, when we get kind of squirrely about thinking about our value or our worth, I like going back to Oprah. And Holly mentioned something about Oprah earlier. I think we were off camera at that point, but I really like what Oprah says here is like, when you undervalue what you do, when you accept less than you should, or you settle for something, the world undervalues who you are. You know, like, it's like this adage that no one will take you seriously until you do. So it starts with what you're allowing in your own heart and sense about yourself. And, you know, if you were an entrepreneur, like some of us are, if you discount your fees, or you cut your rates, or as an employee, if you accept less than what you know that you're worth out there in the world, it ultimately cheapens who you are, and it can cause things too that you can find yourself spread too thin, right? Because you're sharing yourself around for less than you should be getting in return, or you want to get in return. It can actually ultimately lead to feelings of resentment. And that resentment could be that you resent them for undervaluing you or underpaying you. But even worse, you can actually start to resent yourself for copping out or giving in or not standing up for the most important person, which is you. So think about how you're valuing yourself when you're coming to the table. Holly and Tiffany have given you some great tools to be thinking about that from the data perspective, actually quantifying it. And it actually leads nicely right into the blueprint I wanted to share with you tonight, which is going the other way. Because the first step is all about clarifying to amplify. So where we started when Holly was talking about, getting clear on what it is you want. That's the first question here. What is it that you really want in this context, in this situation? Holly's putting you out, like thinking about it long term. Absolutely. The further out you go in terms of identifying what's important to you. And also my big question is why is that important to you? What is most important in this to you? And then, because I'm thinking back to where I talked about earlier about this disconnect for women in terms of negotiating for others versus negotiating for yourself, ask yourself this important question too. If I look at what I really, really want, and if I were to get that, what I really, really want, who else will be affected by that? Because I bet you'll find that somebody you care about who is important to you will be affected by your success or lack of it in this situation. And let that fuel drive that part of you that is like the mama bear who can get out there and negotiate the pants off when it comes to negotiating for someone else. And sometimes it's about getting something, cluing into something that's really important to you. Maybe it's about, this will allow me to finally be able to invest in that house I'd like to get over on the island. Maybe that's what something that's going to fuel you. Figure out what that is. That the why can be super important to drawing you forward into doing the thing that's difficult, that you maybe feel anxious about in other circumstances. So get clear on that why as well. And, you know, we also talked about that idea of value. Holly's given you some tools already around that, getting clear on what the value is that you're bringing to this table, this conversation, so that when you're in that conversation, navigating that relationship, you're clear about what that is. And that clarity is also one of the things that can help dispel any anxiety, is to spend the time getting that level of clarity. And I think Holly or Tiffany shared too is, you know, think about finding the problem that your company or your boss has the most pain, frustration, and maybe even profit loss with it, and help to solve that. That's how you can add value when you're thinking about ways you can add value into the equation. Okay, next I want to talk about the other person. So this is a key part too. We're talking about mindsets and frames here. So when you think about the other person in your negotiation, how do you think about them? And I'd like share in chat some words that you might use to describe or refer to the other person that you're negotiating with. How do you think about them? So in our photo here, there's somebody sitting across the table. Are they your friend? Do you think of them as your friend? Holly thinks of them as much more professional than her. Yeah. What's the tendency when we're going into a negotiation to how we think about the other partner? What's a name or a word we might use to describe them? Opponent. Yeah. Oh, aggressive. Yeah. We might see them that way. The adversary. That's right. Yeah. These are common words. We might think opponent, adversary, aggressive. Absolutely. And so what is an authority, right? So what does that set up? Does that set up let's get together and make this work? Daryl's shaking her head. No, it sets up a situation like this, doesn't it? It sets up the opposing situation. So when we're thinking about going into this conversation, and remember, I talked earlier about how these negotiations, especially in the workplace, are taking place in the context of a what? Anybody remember? This is a learning moment. I'm trying to do the repetition. Relationship. Yay. Thank you. Akushla? I hope I said that right. Akushla. Yes, they're taking place in the context of a relationship. So I want to offer you an alternative frame. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction again. My apologies. What if you thought of them as your partner, as your potential partner in this conversation? Do you remember Tiffany showed you a slide about thinking about how your boss is interested in your success? Do you think your boss is interested in you being successful when they hire you? Do you think your leader is interested in your success when you're going through a performance review? Yeah. What if you approach them as your potential partner? How does that even change the context of the conversation, the quality of the conversation? Right? Are you more willing to come into the room together and start to work together on something? Yeah. And so here's a quick tip is, and I believe that Tiffany, you had this in your slide, is use language like we more than I. Now, that's not to say you don't use I, because the other place that women can tend to underemphasize is to give away all of the success on her team to her team without taking accountability and ownership on her success as the leader of said team. So there's a balance in there to be aware of. And the we I'm talking about is, how do you and I, so say I'm negotiating with Holly, I might say, so Holly, how can we solve this problem together? Or how do we resolve the difference here? And when I position it as we, not you or not me, then all of a sudden we've already framed it that we're doing this together, we're in this together. So think about how, if you're approaching them as your potential partner, and then allow yourself to get curious about those questions I asked you in the clarifying. Get curious about those questions that they relate to them. What do they want? What do they really want? What would long-term success look like for them? And why is that important to them? And when you can ask those questions back in the mirror about them as you're thinking about it, this is before you've even gotten into the conversation. This is all about preparation at this stage. And then when you're in the conversation, be curious. Those questions that Holly and Tiffany gave you earlier are amazing questions to stimulate that part of the conversation about being curious, about how is this working for you? Those types of things, to getting curious in those questions. And then we want to move into, then we can, when we have that level of curiosity and that connection with that potential partner, then we can start talking about how we can collaborate on solving the problem or finding a match to what we're looking for. So in your promotion conversations, then the two of you are together now are working on finding that solution. And when we're moving beyond, so we're moving beyond here, we're looking for that match, what you both have in common, perhaps, in terms of valuing, and that frame that was given earlier about how you and your boss together can be concerned about the success of the organization, the success of the team, the success of this project. What is it that you both have in common in terms of being of interest? This is a place of finding that way of getting for collaboration. And in those areas where you might be slightly different or have something that is a little off common, look for the way where what you can look for in exchange, what you have of value that would be of value to them, and likewise, so that you're able to lean on that in terms of building that collaboration. And then we get to the crafting of the conversation when you're thinking about building and preparing for a negotiation. I like thinking about it like this diamond. Now, Tiffany talked about disagreement. The importance of disagreement is we want to get to agreement. And I also want to say the thing about any areas where you have a disagreement is you kind of want to cover them off and not slide past them. So when we're talking about trying to get to agreement, that's where we all think we want to get to in our negotiations is let's get to the agreement. But if we rush too fast and we skate over some of these areas, we can find that we might never get to agreement because that area of disagreement might block the agreement. Or if we skate over it, it might actually show up later afterwards because it hasn't been resolved. So I always talk about thinking about how you're going to open the conversation and bringing these skills into your conversation and practicing how you're going to bring listening, your inquiry, which is all about those questions, that curiosity, and also that advocacy piece where this is the place where you're willing to advocate for what it is that you said earlier that you really want. To be able to put yourself in that position of asking for the very thing that you've planned that you want. And I talk about this notion of being calm assertive. And this goes back to what Tiffany was saying earlier in terms of emotional management and self-regulation, that it's possible to be assertive at the same time as being calm. So this phrase, by the way, comes from any of you dog lovers out there who watch Cesar Millan. He talks about this presence with being a dog owner and being the leader of the pack when it comes to your pet, is having that calm assertive, that you will be leading in that manner. But it's not about being aggressive. It's about being assertive while also being calm. Another metaphor I like to use for this is like the iron fist and the velvet glove, right? So you think about your arm, if your arm is really strong, this is an iron fist, it's super strong. But when I wrap it in velvet, it all of a sudden has a different look and a different feel. And so that's the iron fist is the firmness, right? It's just being firm on what it is you say that you want. And the velvet is in terms of the manner, the calmness, and the empathy, perhaps, that you're even bringing to bear. That's the kind of emotion or emotional state I'm wanting to look for. Okay, I said I was going to share some secrets with you, and this is in terms of in the conversation itself. Some of my success secrets, I've already alluded to this one a little bit already, is balancing that sense of advocacy, that self-advocacy with communality. Now this, I I use this tightrope because we've alluded to it earlier. As women, and especially I would think for women of color as well, we're expected to walk a particular tightrope in society. We're damned if we do, damned if we don't, if we're off the side. And so we're, there's a lot of biases, cultural biases that expect women to behave in a certain way. I'm not saying we all have to do that. God knows it wouldn't be here if we did. However, this is like leaning a bit into those expectations. So if women are expected to be communal, when you behave communal, if that makes you more presentable, or it's not even presentable, that's not the word I want. What I'm looking for is, how will they hear you? And if they will hear you more strongly, if you lean into that and that notion of communality, and by that I mean, again, going back to the we language as an example, and not losing sight of your own advocacy for yourself, for the things that you said to yourself that were important, that you identified as the things that you really want. So that's that notion of being able to balance those two as you move forward. The second one here is very much, again, this is repetition, because it's about taking those facts, having those facts at your fingertips, and positioning your ask, starting with the data, the evidence, if you like, presenting the options that work for you, that will fit the possible solution based on the facts. You can share some of those pros and cons of either going either direction, and of course, then also leaning into sharing what's the impact of doing it this way. And the impact, ideally, you're presenting it not only as, what the benefit is to you, include the benefit that it would be to them to accept that what you're asking for. How will this benefit them? Again, this leaning into that notion of empathy by flipping it around and looking at it from their point of view. How will this impact and benefit them to move into that place where you say you want to go? Now, Holly and Tiffany have already said a little bit about silence, but this is the moment when you've made your ask. It's really hard, but just stop talking. Yeah, Ava, this can be the hardest part. So practice it. And I encourage you to practice it in your everyday conversations. When you say something important to your partner tonight, or you have a bomb maybe that you need to drop, whatever it is, just let the silence do some of the work. And here's the thing, because some of you are kind of squeaming, when the hell is she going to start talking again? Right? I can see some nods. And some of you are going, oh, thank God she stopped talking for a moment so I can think about this, so I can actually take this in, right? So the introverts in the crowd like to have a little bit of silence so they can think internally. The extroverts, we like to blah, 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 blah. I think aloud, I make decisions aloud. I like doing it in concert with other people. It's one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn. And just watch though what happens, because there's something that happens in the brain, right? And one of the things that Tiffany was talking about earlier. And so when you allow the silence, somebody will come and fill it, right? Somebody will come and fill it. If you fill it up, you might have lost an opportunity for that thing that you said to land and really land. And here's the thing, if it's something that they haven't been expecting, and I'll say, especially if it's a man, and I'll say, I can say more about that later, but why? You really want to let the silence do the work for you. Because if you've taken them by surprise with your ask, maybe that's a good thing. Okay, I'm going to say enough about that. Just start practicing it when you can. And I'm happy to answer some more questions about that later. And here's the next thing. This is about the no, right? So what if they say no? This is the number one thing I get. Well, if I ask for it, what if they say no? What if they take the offer off the table? Well, first of all, when you're in the performance review setting, you're already at the table, you're already in the relationship. The chances of being completely and utterly rejected, like you're fired for asking for more, are so out there that the risk of your not asking is greater than the probability that they're going to fire you for asking, right? So be thinking about it that way. And even in the job offer, when you're going for a new job, the chance of them taking the offer off the table, yes, there have been highly, highly, highly publicized cases, are so tiny, the risk of that happening. And I want to ask you, if you ask for more and they take the offer off the table, is that a place you want to work for? I mean, really, that's my serious question to you. You know, be thinking about it through that way. So there's the thing about no is no doesn't mean never. Like when I heard that's the best we can do, clearly it wasn't, because he tested it and she gave him more. So there was something behind that curtain that I didn't test. But it also often means no, not right now, or no, not right now because I don't see the complete value yet. So, you know, be asking the questions. Well, what would it take to say, what would it take for this to work out? Or what else do we need to have happen in order for this to be possible? Don't just let it go like I did, right? Is asking some of those great questions to balance their resistance with your persistence. I haven't heard about uncertain times because I often get asked, well, what about now? It's all so different. Well, I heard this back in 2009 when the crash happened then. And the same things are important, are true in uncertain times as they are during general times, is we want to be thinking through the lens of what's important to me, what's important to them, and how can we bring this together into a place where we can both win, we can have a winning agreement, we can leave here feeling satisfied and or resolve whatever it is we're trying to do. So that's going to be an important piece of this. Now, the next part I wanted to show you is the importance of rehearsal. And I think we've talked about this in a couple of different ways. And this has happened over and over again, very similar. This client was a very similar situation to Holly, the woman that you talked about earlier that came through the WIMDI last year, very similar situation. And it was rehearsal was the number one thing that made the difference for her in terms of being able to go to that conversation that she wanted to gain some traction on, and succeeded because she was so prepared that it went exactly how we practice, which is always so much fun. I want to share with you the final part of the model before we go anywhere. And we've already talked actually about celebrating, but this is also about committing, because you want to be able to seal the deal and the relationship. And part of that is planning the implementation, like who does what, where, when, and how, some of those minutiae. And please get it in writing in some form. It doesn't have to be a 50-page contract. It can be an email confirming your understanding. Get something in writing, because it's this place where we don't have anything to go back to, that we might have some minor or even major misunderstandings about what we agreed to. So this is about putting your agreement in writing in some form. So that's the model. It's very clear, simple, very five C's. And you can apply it in any negotiation. My top mistake in negotiation is not preparing, is only thinking about the execution, thinking about it in isolation from everything else. We have given you so many tools tonight to be thinking about how to prepare, and start preparing now, not the day before your performance review, and definitely not the day before the conversation about the raise, the promotion. Please do yourself a favor and invest that time in your preparation, because here's what happens when you invest the business case for women. When we're empowered to negotiate, we get these great results. We not only get great results for ourselves, we feel better about ourselves. We are then able to show up at the table more powerfully as a strong leader, just like Alice, one of our favorite WIMDI members, who was able to do this and set a new benchmark, got an amazing result. And now she has the uber confidence to be at the table. And thank you, Holly, for adding that extra in there as well. So I promised I was going to share something quick for you about what can happen for you next. These are some of the areas I work in. And I want to share this with you. I'd love for you to pick one thing tonight that you want to, and more importantly, are willing to apply in your negotiations today, tomorrow, in the next little while. I'd love it if you share it in the chat. I'd really love it if you go on LinkedIn and share it and use the hashtag wisdom for your takeaway. That would be awesome. And if you're interested in finding out a bit more, I have a few consultation sessions available. I think we've got, okay. I've got about 5 or 6 over in the next month. So if you're interested in that, you can either click on the QR code or go ahead and go to that URL there on the screen. It should be clickable and it will enter. Oh, thank you, Holly. You're so fast at those kinds of things. And that's me for the night.